Okay, so describe the home front in America during World War II. There we go. Okay, the video, Rosie Riveter, should help out a little bit, especially with women's involvement in on the home front and the factories and the businesses, while the men are all fighting overseas. There we are. Squeaky chalk. Oh my. All right, so let's go over this real quick. Describe the home front in America during World War II. All right, so who was Rosie the Riveter? Was it a person? Was it an actual person? What?
An actual person now.
No, what was it really?
Idea of the woman in the workforce.
Yeah, it was more of a movement, right? It was a way to try to promote women to get involved in the war effort by taking some of these industrial jobs, getting involved in the factories, and helping out the war effort by creating these armaments, supplies, and weapons. Good job. Good job. And we know that that was kind of taking hold, and a little bit of history about it. I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you read that article yesterday, really describing Rosie the Riveter and where it came about and how this was a great form of propaganda during World War II to try to really prepare the home front, get the home front ready and involved with everybody. Okay, not only obviously men but children. Okay, women. Good. What else was on the home front that we talked about yesterday? Describe the home front for me. Ethan, what do you have, buddy? You don't have anything. Why not? You didn't know. We went over it yesterday in class. Didn't we? Pretty sure we did. Pretty sure we did. Jeepers. Melissa, what do you have?
We went to the men's jobs in the workplace while they were at war to try and support the war, which lifted them out of it.
Okay. All right. So we see the Depression kind of leaving sight here as the United States is stepping up towards war. What was one of the vocab terms we went over yesterday? The war what? War Production Board, right? What was a War Production Board? Haley Klinger, what was a War Production Board? Okay, good. And they were transitioning from peacetime products, right, and finalized goods to wartime products, right? So making armaments and supplies. So the War Production Board, very beneficial with trying to promote all these industries and factories to prepare for this war. All right, so what examples did I give yesterday about how the New Deal prepared for this industrialization all throughout the United States? Do you remember, Lance? What was one of those New Deal agencies that helped grow industrialization in the Southeast U.S.? Second.
W, the Wood Production Board.
We talked about that one. Well, what do we have here? Haley Klinger, go ahead. Yeah, the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. Good job. All right. So it was like we were kind of predicting what might happen here. Try to expand industrialization, help grow, these factories and businesses all throughout the U.S., even these remote locations. We can power generate, have power generation to these areas. Talk about the Hoover Dam already, right? In Southwest United States, generating power to those remote locations out in the Southwest. Same thing, trying to spread industrialization. If the more factories and industries we have, the better, more likely we're gonna produce as many products and goods as possible to win us this war. And that was the biggest advantage the United States had, was the war production. It was unmatched, right? It was unmatched. No one could compete with the U.S. when it came to industrial power, and we proved that. And a lot of it because, well, the war wasn't fought on our soil, right? Yeah, Pearl Harbor happened, but that's an island way out in the middle Pacific. We established it mainly for military base, okay? But when it came down into the borders, continental U.S., we really didn't see any type of fighting there. Okay, we didn't see any type of factories, industries being impacted like we see in Europe and out in Asia. Okay, good. What else? What about the home front? What else is involved there? What else? Chris, this was a term we talked over yesterday. It was involved in World War I. What were people advised to do at home?
Talking about the Victoria Gardens.
Yeah, rain makes corn, right? Corn makes, I'm not going to finish the rest, but so yeah, good job. Victory Gardens. Yeah, Victory Gardens. Good. So write that down as well. So Victory Gardens, trying to promote many individuals to plant these gardens and try to supply the troops overseas with food. Okay, we talked about some of the issues with agriculture, and right at the end of World War I, moving up into the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl didn't help anything out either. But now all of a sudden, things are kicking back in the right direction. Some of these New Deal agencies we talked about helped with this regulation of agricultural crops and try to protect some of these farm fields, right, and environment. Good. So Victory Gardens. What else? Oh my gosh, we talked about a lot yesterday. Ethan, you missed a good lesson, I guess. What else did we talk about? What did people do all throughout cities and towns, and even areas like this? What they do? Try to help with supplies, help with resources. They do what they do. I think it was another term I had on there. Oh, remember? Starts with an R. Rationing. Yep, good job. So rationing items, okay? Resources like rubber, like metals, okay? Plastics you didn't see too much, but hey, plastics. A lot of these different items were rationed to make sure that it can be used for the war. Okay, so many areas like schools, right? Okay, schools, they would come around and people around the community say, hey, if you have any leftover rubber, have any leftover metals, bring it to the school. Okay, we'll do a pickup, almost like a recycling pickup in a way, and they'll use these rations to take them and try to prepare it for the war, make armaments out of it, you name it. Okay, use them for armored vehicles, you name it. All right, and people were even given ration cards, right? Ration cards. Tell them like what scheduled ration that they need to, what scheduled item that might be picked up at what location. Okay, what they can buy at the grocery store on certain days to make sure all that food, all those products are going over to help the soldiers fight. You guys good with that? I know there's probably more that I'm missing, but those are a lot of the things in the home front that really helped prepare America for this war. Oh, last one. Oh my gosh. With this war effort. Andrew?
They went over to making planes.
Yeah. Rather than making automobiles and different models of their cars, they decided, well, let's make bombers, let's make planes. And it was really unmatched. It was unbelievable. These B-52 bombers, okay, they were creating one per hour because of the assembly line. and how quick and fast and efficient these motor companies really were in the U.S. Okay, Ford especially. I'm going to try to find that video. If we have some time at the end, talking about Henry Ford, I believe it was his son, and then FDR calling him up and saying, hey, actually I think it was Henry Ford himself. FDR called him up, we need your help producing all these different types of items and armaments, you name it. There's no problem, we'll do it all here. All right, is there any questions? And you can kind of relate that to today. Many of these businesses and factories, what did they make for preparing for the coronavirus? Ventilators, right? Yeah, ventilators are given a plan by the government to make ventilators. So same thing, whenever there's a conflict, whenever there might be an issue going on, the government kind of helps keep these businesses afloat during these times of need and saying, hey, maybe shift to make ventilators, maybe shift to make hand sanitizer. A lot of these beer, alcohol industries started to do that. All right, any questions? You guys good? Like I said, there's a lot to the home front, and realistically, that's what won us this war. Okay, terms for today. Autumn, it's not going to be a repeat anymore. We're moving in different directions. Uh-oh. Douglas MacArthur, Bataan Death March, and the fall of the Philippines. Oh, no. Oh, no. I'm a dead giveaway what's going to happen now, I guess. Yeah, we're good. So, yeah, the home front's kicking in the right direction. But out in the Pacific, early on, 1941, 1942, it's not looking too good for the U.S. Lindsay got that flag up then.
And there's
Huh. You weren't out lifting this morning, were you? You sleeping in? So this Bataan Death March, just be careful what you look up because you might see some graphic images. Just a fair warning there. Got your movie slip earlier in the year, so it should be okay. Oh, Haley Claire, I got you again, 8th period. You won't be here. Heading home. Calling a day early. Closing up shop. Okay, all right. So what do we got here? What do we got here? Douglas MacArthur. Who is he? Who is he? Jakari, what do you have for Douglas MacArthur? Okay, so he is going to be, he's the supreme general, right? He's the general of the supreme commander, is what they call him, of the Pacific Theater for America, okay? Technically the Allied powers, but realistically it was America just fighting this war out in the Pacific, okay, for the most part. So Douglas MacArthur, the supreme Allied commander for the Pacific Theater. Okay, we'll talk about the European theater a little bit later. But MacArthur, he's involved here in the Pacific Theater, and he's really the one that is going to take it to Japan. He gets a high ranking, a great, I guess you could say, accolades for his time in the Pacific Theater during World War II. And he uses a technique called island hopping to push Japan back to their main borders, which we'll discuss and go over a little bit later. Okay, he also will be involved. So yeah, well, at the end of the war, he'll accept the surrender of Japan in 1945, which we'll go over and discuss. And he'll also be involved in the Korean War. Okay, the Korean War, and things get a little hairy there. Okay, it really doesn't end up too well for him, which we'll get over that soon at the end of World War II. So Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of the Pacific Theater. So he's going to be dealing with Japan and their expansion, trying to push them back to their borders. All right, Bataan Death March. What do we have here? What do you got, Lentz?
Forcible transfer of the Imperial Japanese Army and American and Filipino prisoners of war.
Oh, are you good? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So with Bataan Death March, this was right after the Philippines, right after it fell. Okay, we know the United States controlled the Philippines at the end of the Spanish-American War. All right. Up until that point, it was a U.S. territory. We use it for resources, military base, you name it. But moving up into the 1940s, right after Pearl Harbor, Japan attacks the Philippines. And you kind of know what happens there. So just looking at the next term. So the Philippines falls, and with that being said, Japan, they show their brutality towards their enemy, towards their opposition. And this death march was brutal. About 60 to 70 miles these men had to walk. And they had to be really escorted to these concentration labor camps in the Philippines. And it was intense heat there. So it was around 90, 100 degrees constantly. The humidity was awful as well. These people didn't get fed food. They didn't get any type of water. They didn't get any breaks. And we'll discuss more in detail what happens, which is really, really terrible, terrible things. And a lot of that word comes back to the U.S., and we retaliate by doing a lot of firebombing. It's not incendiary, kind of incendiary to Tokyo, which we'll go over a little bit later. Fall of the Philippines, when that happened. So this kind of goes hand in hand with Bataan Death March. Haley Klinger, what do you have? You don't have this one? Okay, so this falls pretty quick, 1941, moving up into 1942. Okay, and this is where Japan pushed us out of the Philippines. All right, so right at the start of the war, right when America's getting involved, it's not looking too pretty. It's not looking too good for the Allied powers. Okay, so the U.S. is actually taking a hit. Okay, and Japan's showing their dominance out in the seas and showing their dominance out in the Pacific Theater, and the U.S. really can't compete at first. Okay, eventually we'll talk about it. It's overwhelming how the U.S. kind of pushes them out of these areas and really shows their military superiority. But for now, okay, in the early 1941, okay, that range when the U.S. first enters the war, it's like you need to gain traction first, right? The U.S. wasn't in any type of war or battle since World War I. Now it's a totally different type of warfare and environment. So this is going to be tricky, tricky stuff. All right. And with the fall of Philippines, Douglas MacArthur says, we'll be back. Because I'll be back. That's why they call him the Terminator. Guys, you know the Terminator says that? I'll be back. Yep. All right. Is there any questions? Good? All right. So just 2 slides today. That's it. Just 2. Nothing crazy. Tomorrow, I'll probably just have a reading for you, and that'll be it. All right, so fighting in the Pacific, Douglas MacArthur. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there we go. Fighting in the Pacific, Douglas MacArthur. He is this Allied commander out here in the Philippines, out in the Pacific theater. So make sure you guys remember that. We'll talk about Dwight Eisenhower. He'll be later a president. He's Supreme Allied Commander in the European theater. So when you think of the Allied powers, you think of America, the man that's making all the decisions, okay? Top-ranking general. Dwight Eisenhower in Europe, okay? Now in the Pacific, it's MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur. He served in World War I. He was highly accoladed, and he was troops as well. And, you didn't want to cross paths with him, that's for sure. So, with that being said, right after Pearl Harbor happened, right after Japanese surprise attack, America was kind of down in the dumps for a little bit, but we're motivated, okay? We know at the home front, the people at home did everything they could to try to prepare us for this war. But where was our military? Was our military strong enough just at the start of World War II? Did we have a high, strong military? No, we didn't. No, we didn't. We weren't prepared for this type of war, especially out here in the Pacific theater. This was a totally different environment, totally different. Okay, so this was something that we weren't prepared for whatsoever. At the same time, did we have a Pacific fleet? It was out of commission from Pearl Harbor, right? So when it came to it, we were licking our wounds yet. And we still had this military base in the Philippines. We were seeing Japan advance at an alarming rate, okay, taking over large areas all throughout Asia, Southeast Asia, and sooner or later it was going to come to the Philippines, this military base. And when did we acquire the Philippines? When was that, Chris? Do you remember? It was after a war. What was that war? Spanish-American War, yep, 1902, right? Okay. So we had the Philippines ever since then, yep. And we used that for resources, obviously. And at the same time, we used it as a military base to keep an eye on anything going on here in Asia. And as Japan was becoming a dominant threat, well, we had to try to make sure that they didn't take over this territory. But it's unfortunate. Japan comes in, guns a-blazing, pushes us out of the Philippines. It pushes out of the Philippines. So it pushed MacArthur and the troops, his men, to leave the island and go back to Australia, down to Australia here. Who controlled Australia at this time?
British.
Great Britain. Good job. Yep, Great Britain. So they had to maybe come back, lick their wounds, and maybe think of a new plan of attack and try to stop this really dominant threat in the Pacific, okay, in the Southeast Asia, which Japan was becoming. So the Philippines fell by May of 1942. 75,000 soldiers forced to march over 60 miles in the Bataan Death March. So this Bataan Death March, this is something that, like I mentioned before, be careful what you look up because some pictures you might find are hard to look at. And some of the stories that you'll read about, okay, I attached a reading there for you. It's alarming. It's disturbing in many ways. So the Japanese tried to push these troops and soldiers to a prison camp, really, on the Philippines after Japan took over the Philippines. Right? They forced them to walk 60 to 70 miles. Some cases, they actually used a rail car. Okay, and if you're a soldier, would you rather walk 70 miles or jump in the rail car? What do you think? Jakari, what would you do? Oh, would you? Okay. Well, I should have described the rail car for you first. So the rail car had no way of plumbing or water or nothing. So And when it came to using the bathroom, you're just going to let it go on the floor. They packed in like sardines. So a room like this, okay, just packed elbow to elbow. Same time, it's 110 degrees. And this is a tin metal rail car, packed tight with people. You think you want to be in that rail car?
Not one.
Okay, you walk. All right, okay. All right, that's what I thought. So many people in these rail cars actually died, obviously, because of how extreme heat it was. And they didn't have any water. They're jam-packed tight in these rail cars. They didn't have anywhere to go to the bathroom. And it was really just a terrible, terrible time for these people being transported. And some people just saw the brutality, saw and experienced that. And they're like, "Oh, walk! This is unbelievable." But walking, same thing. It's very hot, humid. Okay, many of these men weren't given water, any type of food. Right. At the same time, you think the Japanese were friendly with them as they're walking? Heck no, heck no. Some of these Japanese troops, as the soldiers were walking, these American troops and these Filipino troops, as they're walking, these samurai swords that the Japanese have to try to keep them moving because obviously it's hot. They have no water, no food. Many of these men collapse. And as they collapse, these samurai swords were so sharp. When they wing it, try to hey, let's keep moving. Hit their arms, lop it off, lop their arms right off because of how sharp these swords actually are. And they jab people with bayonets. Some of these, I guess you could say, prisoners, right, to keep moving. And many times it would just kill them right then and there. Once people fell over, collapsed, they used some of these vehicles that were following the troops up to the prison camp. Japanese would run them over. It's like, try to make an example out of these people. It's like, hey, if you fall over, you're going to get hit with a samurai sword, right? If you fall over, you're going to get jabbed with a bayonet. If you fall over, you're probably going to get run over by a Jeep, all right, or any type of armored vehicle. And it was devastating for these troops, all right, devastating for these prisoners, okay? Walking 70 miles, it's a tough task to do, even if you have water and food. But now in extreme heat, humidity, no food, no water, and at the same time, you're in fear that if you do fall over, you do collapse, if maybe a Japanese person's having a bad day, it's a Japanese troop or a Japanese soldier, okay, you're probably going to get stuck with a bayonet. You're probably going to get whacked with a samurai sword. It was terrible, terrible things. Also, to keep the men walking, many of these Japanese troops would pull these soldiers out, these prisoners, and make examples of them right in front of them, lopping off their heads right in front of them. Hey, continue to walk, or this is going to be you. Done. Okay, shooting them as they're walking through or walking up to the prison camp. Those terrible, terrible things. And some of this word traveled back to the United States, and it's created extreme hatred for Japan. Obviously, we're in war against them, and now they're torturing our troops, torturing our these prisoners of war. It was a terrible, terrible thing, terrible event with this Bataan Death March. Okay, but 7,000 died. Okay, 7,000. Right, like I mentioned, not only United States soldiers and prisoners of war, but Filipino prisoners of war as well. But anyway, by the summer of 1942, Japan was at its height. Okay, and we did that map activity, right? The map activity really showed Japan controlling much of Southeast Asia and up into the Pacific. They really controlled the whole Pacific. And the United States still licking its wounds from Pearl Harbor. Okay, still trying to get back into the game and rebuild this Navy that they kind of lost. All right, is there any questions on that? All right, so the Philippines fell, 1941. MacArthur is pushed out, okay, but before he left, he goes, we'll be back, we'll remember what happened here, and we're really going to stick it to them here. We're going to really take it to Japan. And that being said, he's forced to push down Australia, moving out to the Coral Sea here to try to plan an attack to take back the Philippines and move Japan back to their borders, which we'll get to soon. All right, but the Bataan Death March, like I said, make sure you guys remember that sad, sad stuff, terrible things what Japan did to many of these prisoners. I know you're saying war's war, right? Anything can really happen, but this is really a brutal event, okay? And like I mentioned, if you're looking up videos of it, if you're reading anything about the Bataan Death March, just make sure that you're in the right state of mind before you look anything up with that, the involvement of it. All right, is there any questions? You guys good? All right. There we go. Take this down. There it is.